Hey folks, welcome back. It's been a while. Gosh, I think almost a year since we've done this. It's Braai Brus with Byron and myself. How you doing? Welcome back to the program. We haven't had a chat in a long time where we just disinfect the nonsense. We break apart the nonsense going on around the world. Byron, how's it going, man? It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while. Lots happened in the intervening period, I'm afraid. The world's gone a bit,
Wonky?
predictably a bit more nuts.
Yeah, that's probably more accurate. I was going to say wonky, but nuts is crazy. I mean, it's unsafe to be any person in a lot of places these days, but maybe we should start off with the nonsense going on in the UK. I mean, it's just crazy. I know you've covered this topic, but I tell you, being in the UK, being a Brit, it may not be safe anymore. Certainly being a Jew in the UK is a dangerous proposition right now.
Yeah, I mean, so for those of you who don't know, I have a WhatsApp group. Morning Shot has a WhatsApp group called Morning Shot. So if you haven't already gone and joined it, go join it. But I cover a lot of UK news in there. And obviously, I have some commentary on there, but a lot of my commentary in the news relates to the UK. And you can imagine, yeah, it's not looking great. The problem that the UK appears to have at the moment is that I can only describe it as appeasement, which I'm sure you'll probably say the same, Chris. The UK government's been appeasing certain people for a long time on the basis of a voting bloc, and the result of that is it's coming to fruition, I'm afraid.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's not just the UK. You look at Germany today. Germany now has 18 million foreign-born people living in this country. Most of them have no legitimate basis to be there whatsoever. The number of mosques sprouting up all over Germany was over 1,000. Now it's well beyond that. It's crazy what the German government's doing. They're doing the same thing that the British government is doing. You stand on the corner as an 18-year-old with a Union Jack on a public street and get arrested and put in prison for a year. They're doing the same thing. They arrested a German woman who commented about the gang rape of a 12-year-old German girl by a bunch of illegal immigrants. They were not given any prison time by a German female judge who said, well, they didn't understand. It's not their culture. So they're released back on the street, and the woman was apoplectic, and she commented about it. She got a 3-year prison sentence. The world is upside down, brother.
Look, a lot of it becomes a lot of people don't understand really what's going on to a large degree, and a lot of it actually comes down to economic theory. So, one of the things that happened a number of years ago is that most countries' GDP, everybody wants the GDP to go up, right? It's the measure of a successful society is to have GDP numbers go up. Now, at some point in time, any country is going to hit a saturation point purely because of supply and demand, economic indicators. So what tended to happen in a lot of Western society is that they redid their economic models to say that your human capital is now the new capital. So basically population numbers equal line going up, and the more population numbers you have, the better the curve looks, and you can develop or you can reassess, economic prosperity according to population growth. I know this is all very technical, but it's kind of important to understand that at some point in time, they looked at population growths in many European countries. They looked at those and they said, well, if you actually look at it from an organic population rate, the population numbers were quite low. The replacement rate for a normal household, for a normal country, that's for a country to stay static, is around 2.1. In Western Europe, in some countries, it's as low as 1.2. In Britain, it's 1.4. That basically means if you're at 1.2, that's extinction of your people. Your people will literally disappear. So the answer for them was either to incentivize population regrowth. In other words, you can get people to stay in the workplace. But the societies had made that very difficult because of feminism, sexual revolutions, the desire to be a strong, independent female woman, to stay at home, you shouldn't have to cook and clean, all that kind of stuff. And the pressures of the GDP curve constantly going up meant that it wasn't easy to get the existing populations to change track. So the easiest option was to import a population. Now, when the UK, I'll talk about the UK because we started this off with the UK. When the UK initially had the initial amounts of people that went there as workers, skilled migrants, what you effectively had is they had a public statement. The public statement was, we need people to pay the taxes and to fund the national British people as they get older. As they get older, they're going to need more people to contribute into the system because of all the state sponsorship of the NHS and the retirement funds and whatever else. And they were like, well, there's not enough British people to do it, so we'll import a population and they will contribute and they will effectively help all these Brits like age nicely and fund the system. That was the initial promise. But that's not actually what's happened. So what's happened is over time, the people that they've imported are very loath to fund the individuals to whom they were supposed to come in and help. They typically outbred the local populations by like quite a lot. And the result of that was that they brought, in many instances, cultural ideas that weren't equivalent to the native population, completely overrun them, and in some instances now are completely anti the very people they were brought in to help. Now, once you realize that as a country, the results are problematic because now you have to ask the difficult question: how do we fix this? Well, the first option is chuck all the people on a boat and send them off abroad. That's option number one. That's not going to work out too well because many of these individuals have large families, and some of them, it's problematic because how do you determine who gets to stay and how many of them get to go? Once it's in the system and they're like second or third generation, it's not easy to ship them off to another country because that country might not necessarily want to take them, so they're in the system. And that's exactly where they are in Britain. The other option is it lands up in open tribalism, where this population segments itself away from this population, and that's exactly what we see in Birmingham. So the reality is you got a very imperfect system. Sorry about that. You got a very imperfect system. You got a lot of tensions. And if you allow people to fester those tensions too much, it's going to land up in conflict. So what does the government do? Stops you from wearing your flag. Stops you from being national because they're worried about national pride, meaning that anything that's not national is foreign and anything that's foreign is bad. If you talk about it online, that's bad. If you tell people the obvious, that's bad. Because they're scared of the consequences of people actually becoming awake to what's going on. So the only way to really deal with it is to suppress it. But that's not great either.
No, it's definitely not great. But, it's interesting. It didn't work. The UK tried to, after being battered in the Second World War, its economy destroyed, its population obliterated, the male population anyway, after 2 world wars. Britain tried to start with the Windrush generation to bring people in from the Caribbean to work as laborers. Then they came in from the subcontinent. And instead of, now the Windrush generation, a lot of them did kind of integrate into the UK and mix in very well. Let's be fair to them. Some didn't, but most did. But the South Asian population has gone out of its way not to integrate into British society for the most part. And it really hasn't worked. England and the UK have been hollowed out from an industrial perspective. There's virtually no industrial activity there anymore. If it wasn't for the island of Canary Wharf and London's financial sector, UK would be a complete disaster. If you look at it now, Byron, the poorest state in America per capita GDP is Mississippi. It has a larger per capita GDP than the entire United Kingdom. In other words, the poorest people in America, generally speaking, live better or have more money than people in the UK. That's insane. It's $56,000, $55,000 in Mississippi. It's only $52,000 in the UK this year. That's just insane, especially given the rate of taxation in the UK.
Yeah, now there's some very interesting indexes you can go up and look up if you're really bored and you have time, and that is what you get paid for the equivalent jobs per country. Now, considering that Britain is meant to be obviously a first world country with first world wages and first world infrastructure, if you look at an average job, let's say, for example, an IT programmer, an IT programmer per year in the United Kingdom could earn anywhere between 70 and 80,000 a year. In the United States, there's upwards of $250,000. Like, it's not equivalent. The actual pay is nowhere near. And so this actually becomes problematic for proper professions like a doctor. because obviously you can take that profession wherever you want. And what you tend to find is that a lot of like the local trained doctors get poached by, well, America. But the salaries that they earn, like as a junior doctor, it's like 30,000 or 30 to 40,000. You can earn an equivalent salary probably working at Tesco's, stacking shelves.
Yeah.
It becomes highly problematic, like because you've got skilled individuals that you can't pay large wages to. Obviously, they're state controlled in terms of the wage. Now, that individual goes to America and they're earning anywhere from 500,000 upwards. So the reality is that the UK can't retain talent, which obviously has a massive impact in itself, right? But that talent still needs to be filled. So what do? Well, they go to places like Kenya and Ghana and Namibia and wherever else, and they go and they poach their talent, because now all of a sudden 40,000 rand or 40,000 pound in their local currencies, that's a lot of money. So ironically, as a South African, I am more likely to be treated by a Zimbabwean nurse in England than I am in South Africa, because they need cheap labor for the system and they poach Zimbabwe's nurses. Now, we know this to be true because Zimbabwe filed a complaint at the UN for England stealing their nurses. So that becomes problematic. Why? Well, because if you know anything about Zimbos, they generally, sometimes they don't really want to integrate very well with certain British communities because they feel that they were slighted underneath Ian Smith. So this starts to become problematic. Now, you can amplify that outwards. We've used the sanitized versions, but now you start to take individuals from Syria, Pakistan, wherever else. Your problem compounds.
Oh, indeed,
it really
does,
compounds
in so many different ways. And you talk about this; it's been going on for years, for decades now. The UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Anglophone world have been poaching nurses from Africa, especially doctors as well. But the old adage that there's more Malawian doctors in Manchester than there are in all of Malawi is actually true. There's actually more Malawian doctors in Manchester than all of the country of Malawi, with 18 million people, or 23 million, whatever the actual count is now. It's crazy. And it's not just the salary, though, Byron. I mean, that's part of it. But nurses are treated like crap in Africa. They get no responsibility. They're dismissed. They're really there just, I'm embellishing a little bit, often just to be the bedpan cleaners. But in America and the UK, they're given more responsibility. So it comes more job fulfillment, too, not just better wages.
Oh, no, I agree. But, it's becoming problematic now. Specifically, we started this off talking about what is the situation ultimately with the UK and like the Jewish communities. Well, when you start to import large amounts of foreign immigrants, sometimes they come with their own pre-existing issues, shall we say, and that becomes problematic. But the problems of what that ultimately means is that, let's say in certain parts of the country, Leeds as an example, there is a huge Indian and Pakistani community. Well, once a year they have a big fight with each other, and it's usually around the Independence Day for Pakistan. Because the Indians and the Pakistanis, they don't necessarily agree on this whole independence thing, and they have a huge big fight, right? So, and it's completely expected. But what that shows you is that the individuals themselves have more allegiance to their native country. You can also see it then in certain political parties, because certain political parties are being set up by individuals whose primary objective is to siphon money out of the UK to their local thing of interest. I'm going to say thing of interest in a very loose way, abroad. So an example of that is there is a political party who set up with the sole ambition of creating an airport in Pakistan. Like, that's it. They want the UK to fund the creation of an airport in Pakistan. That's their sole reason for existing. And now we also have a political party, a number of them, we call them the pro-Gazan parties, where their entire intention is to destroy the state of Israel. How do you, what's that got to do with Britain? Like that that well-known province that well-known province of England, Gaza. Like, it's stupid, but this is what happens when you import a foreign population with zero understanding of what's going on.
Well, that's exactly what I've been saying here in the U.S. for many, many years. For instance, the Liberian community, which came here in temporary protected status in 1990 from a civil war that's been over for 20 years, won't go back. And the Congressional Black Caucus garners enough support for them to get that extended over and over and again. Some of them have been here for 36 years, and they're making lots of money living in Chicago or Maryland or D.C. or Atlanta. And I know because I deal a lot with the Liberian American expat community. But the thing is, they lobby Congress. When I was in Liberia, we need money for the army, to rebuild the army. And the reason we got it wasn't because the members of our Congress, championing it, was because the Liberian political action folks who got out there and pushed members of Congress, even though they're not American citizens, to give money to Liberia. And we spent billions of dollars in Liberia. These people come to our country with their loyalty and affinity for a foreign land and then intrude in our place. And here's another one. This is kind of not the same thing, but Byron, it goes along that line. One of the problems with birthright citizenship nonsense and the perversion of the 14th or 13th Amendment in America, those born here, I'm sorry, not 13th, the 15th Amendment, the perversion of that amendment, no, 14th, sorry, I'm tired, the 14th Amendment, the perversion of that birthright citizenship, which was meant to give citizenship to former slaves, is that people come here as destination shopping to drop a baby so that baby gets a passport, and then they claim American citizenship for that so they can come here. But more importantly, I had a case of a Nigerian general who was in my class at the War College, and he said to me, you people are crazy. And he always came up with stuff like this. Okay, what's wrong? What's wrong? He said, no, my brother, he's got 2 kids, they're Americans. I said, oh, they live in America? No, they live in Nigeria. Okay, but they used to live here. No, they never lived here. I said, well, then how are they Americans? Well, his wife came over each time she was pregnant, 6 months, stayed here for 6 months, had the baby. Now they're American citizens. And I said, yeah, that's a problem because now they go back to Nigeria. They get involved in their ethnic nonsense with other ethnic groups in Nigeria. And the first time they're in trouble, they run to the American consulate and involve and embroil the Americans in a domestic issue in Nigeria. I mean, that's how this gets even worse with these people, this so-called dual allegiance. It's a real problem. And Trump is the only person other than Orban who's really looked at this seriously. And Trump's taken a lot of grief for it, but Trump is not wrong on this issue.
No, he's not. But Orban has obviously lost his election, so he's no longer
I think
he's
people,
no longer the king.
I think people just got tired of him in 16 years. It's a bit of a stretch.
Pretty much. That's exactly what's going to happen with Netanyahu.
Yeah.
Netanyahu is unlikely to win the next election as well, but he's had 35 years in power. If only it worked like that in Africa, but unfortunately it generally doesn't tend to work the same way. But in any case, one of the things that we can see when it comes through to the Jewish community in the UK is that the actual issue is very easy to understand, and that is that for the longest time, certain communities have harbored, should we call it, ill will to many of the Jewish individuals. And the reality is that we had this idea behind emancipation. Everybody was equal in the eyes of the law. Everybody, had equal protection from citizens of the state. And, these type of things wouldn't be tolerated in a modern democracy. But the reality is what we are seeing with the Jewish community in the UK really should concern people. Not because it involves the Jewish community. It is because many of these things are being tolerated purely on the basis that these are political parties who have decided that actually the votes of these individuals, despite them being criminals, are far more important than following ideas like emancipation or equality before the law. And so if you look at it to a large degree, why does the Muslim community in many instances feel emboldened in the UK? Well, that's actually easier to understand because they are now hugely protected by the state. We've seen allegations of two-tier policing. It's not an allegation, it's a reality. And when these events occur, if they occur against a mosque, the government will put forward hundreds of millions of pounds to protect the mosque. Any other community is told to suck it up, buttercup. It's a one-off event. And so actually one of the videos on my WhatsApp group is a guy who goes on for 4 minutes straight talking about one-off events. Don't calm down. It's just a one-off event. And when you actually go for 4 minutes and you're like, it's just a one-off event, you realize it's not a one-off event. But the reality is, this is something that Tommy Robinson very, very adequately exposed. And that is, to a large degree, what we are finding is that the mosques encourage people to vote in a specific way. They have the imam in the mosques that will tell everybody in the mosque that they must vote this way, and they all will do it because they are told to. So the reality is, even in the houses, if you've got 6 people in the house and the dad says you all voting for the Green Party, they all vote for the Green Party. And so it's not informed democracy. It becomes a form of tribalism. Now, the reality is, what that means is that if you're a Labour person, let's say you represent the Labour Party, and you want votes, because that's ultimately what it comes down to, right? You want votes. So you know what happens? Well, the Labour individual goes there, he canvasses the mosque, and he says, how many congregants do you have? They go, 1,000 people. Labour says, okay, well, what do you want for the 1,000 votes? They go, well, we want X, Y, Z. We want you to push, I don't know, pro Gaza or something. So they go, sure, no problems. We'll do that. Now, the reality is that's a guaranteed 1,000 votes. Whereas as you go to your normal members of the public, maybe they'll vote, maybe they won't vote, maybe they'll vote for you, maybe they won't. I mean, let's be honest, in most other parts of society, actually voting, the involvement in the voting process is very low. So the result is, like, you can't depend on that, but you can depend on the mosque. So what do? They give in to the demands of the mosque. And then they become petrified of losing the guaranteed seats in the mosque. So they are far more interested in protecting the mosque's rights than they are of the normal population, right? Because the mosque is far more important as a voter bloc. And that's where we are. Your rights, your happiness, your whatever means nothing as long as they get their votes.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. I mean, but we've seen similar things here in the U.S. with immigrant communities in the past. When Irish and Italians would arrive, they would tend to cluster either around their churches or their pubs or civic organizations or labor unions, and they would draw a vote for their candidates. So it's not shocking, but the difference is those groups made an effort to assimilate and did assimilate in society. And we're not seeing that these days. Now, let's segue to South Africa's latest bout of xenophobia. March to March, and this nonsense going on right now in South Africa. The South African High Commissioner has been called on the carpet in Abuja to explain what's going on. The Nigerian government is repatriating Nigerians who want to leave. Something like 230 supposedly have already signed up for a free trip back to Nigeria. And of course, Ghana did the same thing the week prior. It's, I think, comical to see the arrogance of Ronald Lamola calling Brent Bozell in on the carpet for a personal comment that was 100% accurate, as if he did something diplomatically wrong. Yet watching the South African diplomatic representatives be called on the carpet for, nationals of other countries being assaulted and murdered on the streets of South Africa. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's what it's showing you is that to a large degree, South Africa has a degree of let's call it bullshit. I don't know what else to use. What other word to use? South Africa's political position is that borders are colonial repressive tools that were enforced on it by the colonialists from Europe. That's the basic approach. Okay, I'm making it basic, but that's effectively what they believe to a degree. That has problems because they then want to promote things such as let's say, for example, Pan-Africanism. So Pan-Africanism is the idea that you should have this free market in Africa, free movement of people, and free movement of people will move around Africa as they need. Great idea. If you want to have a United States of Africa, fantastic. You have the similar ideas now in the SADC. So in the SADC region, the Southern African region, the 4 countries around here, obviously Botswana, Namibia, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe, they're all historically connected to South Africa, and many of them look to South Africa as the bigger brother because it's the bigger economy, or at least it was. And so there's this kind of connection between them because they were all vying for the struggle against apartheid. And so there's this idea, even in those territories, that there should be in theory, a degree of freedom of movement of people. So that's like the political ideal. Here's the problem, and something Europe can tell you. If you have free movement of people in Europe, they typically go from the poorest country to the richest country for economic opportunities. So you saw this when, like, Portugal and Spain, incredibly poor countries, right? Don't do very well, including Greece. Even in Greece, not actually really that prosperous. All these countries have been close to bankruptcy a number of times. Where did they all do? Went to Germany, because Germany has a bigger economy. Or for a while they went to France. I mean, nobody goes to France these days, but they went to Germany. So the reality is that Germany got a large amount of immigrants. That was actually one of the things that Angela Merkel campaigned for. She was all for, multiculturalism. One of the first big multicultural pro people in Europe was Angela Merkel. Why? Because all these people flooded into Germany, and they were there for work. So what ends up happening in South Africa, or should we say in Africa as a whole? If you have a lot of countries that are desperately poor, and you open up and you take all the borders, where do they go? They go to the richest country in Africa. South Africa happens to be that country, was that country. Now you see, here's where the problem comes in. What happens, like in Germany, at least growth continued. They got a lot of people in from European countries, and there was still growth in Germany. Germany at least still tried to drive some form of growth. However, South Africa didn't. We've had no growth for years. And so that causes problems, because what effectively we've done is we've curtailed growth through economic policies such as BE, expropriation with compensation, all the usual stuff. But the reality is these people have come to South Africa with a view to have a better life and job opportunities. The economy hasn't grown, so the local individual who was born here has a right to work here. They can't even get a job. And then you've got, like, by some estimations, anywhere north of 9 million illegal immigrants in the country, also vying for jobs that don't exist. Well, pressures mount, and pressures mount fast, and that's what we've got. And it's all of the making of politicians, because the politicians promoted this idea of, well, you should be allowed to come here. They've been very lax at monitoring the borders, and they've deliberately been lax at monitoring the borders because, to a degree, they don't believe the border should even be there, to a degree. And they've also been complicit in destroying the economy through corruption, whatever else. So this is the inevitable conclusion. Like, this, we should have all seen this coming.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's comical to watch some of the juvenile concepts that people have about data and about analysis, especially these politicians. Their juvenile belief in how economies work. They don't understand. What they don't understand at the base of everything is that humans or creatures are motivated by things. They don't just automatically do things out of goodwill, and it isn't a kumbaya world. The world will always be a place where people take advantage of other people. There'll be a small number of people who do that. There will be a few people who are able to do whatever they can out of the goodness of their heart, but they also get something out of it in their own mind. But the reality is that if you want something to succeed, you have to make an incentive. And that's why capitalism is the best form of economic interaction and discourse between peoples, because it is simply supply and demand. If people don't want something, the price collapses. If they want something, the price goes up unless it isn't dear. If it's dear, the price goes up. I mean, there's a reason why, Maseratis cost $65,000 to $220,000 and why Lamborghinis cost $600,000. There's only a handful of them, and they have cachet. People want them. But not everybody wants this or that. So, I mean, that's, it drives me nuts how stupid these people can really be with their juvenile analysis. And they think they can control economies in ways that they really don't understand. And the same with people. They think they can form these policies. Germany's Kindergeld policy to give Germans money to have children was a foolhardy approach. Now most of the money goes to illegal aliens who get money, even though they're illegal in Germany, to pop out 8 and 10 kids. You show up with 10 kids from Afghanistan, you're getting, thousands of euros, and Germans who've lived there for 80 years paying taxes are getting nothing or getting a tiny retirement. It's really, really sad to see just how screwed up the system is, because people that don't understand humanity and they're put in charge of things. It's really ridiculous. But to be fair, I guess we're all to blame. We're the idiots that vote for these morons and put them in office. I mean, South Africans had a chance in 2019 to change the trajectory, or 2021, and then again 2024, and stubbornly not changing it. We'll see what happens. Municipal elections coming up, Byron, here on the 4th of November, and I think it's a fool's errand to make predictions. I kind of made, some tongue-in-cheek predictions on Biz News yesterday, but I think it's a tough one to predict what's going to happen here because the data is just incomplete, I think. But generally speaking, ANC down. I think the DA will be down. PA will be up significantly. Freedom for Plus may gain some, and IFP will gain in KZN. EFF will drop, and the MK is a loose cannon. I don't know what they're going to do. Any thoughts?
Pretty much what you said. I think that's pretty much how it looks for all of us. I mean, it's when you look at it, I don't think the DA is going to do very well at all. I also don't think that the ANC is going to do very well. But the smaller parties are going to pick up. I think in the Western Cape, the PA is going to do very well. I think even in some parts of the Eastern Cape, where there's large coloured communities, they're going to do very well with the PA. Gaten's going to do all right. Freedom Front Plus is probably going to pick up more of the white vote as per usual, but the Freedom Front Plus is also slowly transitioning to a different party. They're trying to gain other demographic representation, so they're also going after certain black votes and so forth. But the reality is that the political parties in South Africa are splitting, and what we are seeing is that coalition politics is going to be the norm. We know coalition politics is going to be the norm. But the biggest problem with coalition politics now, everybody's kind of talking about coalition parties or coalition politics being the future. The ANC doesn't work well in coalition. That's the reality. They still, when they're in coalition, they think that the people who join them for coalition basically join the ANC and become part of the ANC, and that they become part of the ANC's voter bloc. So the ANC still seems to think that somehow, because it's in power, it's in a majority. You can basically see this everywhere the ANC governs. Nelson Mandela Bay, Johannesburg, these are even Ekurhuleni. All these areas are areas where the mayors are incredibly corrupt, and service delivery has collapsed completely. But if you looked at who was collapsing it, it's still the ANC. And the ANC's mayors are still protected even by the people that are in coalition with them. And so my concern is that, yes, we're probably going to have a fractured voter bloc. We're probably not going to have people with a lot of the popular mandate. But the reality is that if they are parties that are going to naturally side with the ANC, that on paper you've got this new fractured environment and other political parties and more representation, but in reality you don't really have that. You've just got more of the ANC. Now, coming back to even the xenophobic issue, I think that's actually a feeling that people are starting to have right now, because obviously we've got the GNU, and the idea behind the GNU is it's got more representation, the DA and whoever else, but it still feels very much like an ANC majority.
Oh, no, it is.
And so people are becoming...
It is.
People are becoming disillusioned. They're feeling disillusioned. They're feeling unsatisfied.
Rightly so, Byron. Sorry to interrupt you there. They exactly. The ANC has behaved as if the ANC is in charge, as if they have 50+1. They run foreign policy. They run the police. They run the military. They run intelligence. They run finance. They run everything. And there's no collaboration whatsoever. I'm sure you talk to senior politicians and other parties still too, as I do. And there's virtually no effort. They're excluded, and then they act like it's a coalition government. It's not. It's a veneer of a coalition government, and I think the DA is the ones responsible for that, because they got hoodwinked. They thought to negotiate a coalition between the DA and the ANC, and then behind their back, the ANC went out and brought 8 other parties into this and diluted the DA's role in this significantly. And the DA has no ministries of any substance. I said that from the very beginning. Now, there's a couple comments I'm going to bring in here. Nichols for me says, do our votes really count? Many leaders seem to be selected. Well, Nichols, I'm sorry to break this to you, but since CODESA and then under this constitution, every political leader in South Africa is selected. Nobody votes for leaders. You don't vote for the president. You don't vote for members of parliament. You don't vote for the provincial legislature or your council or your mayor. Only those bodies vote for them. You vote for a party list, and that party list, they select. That's how Winnie Mandela, a twice convicted felon, stays in parliament. Convicted for kidnapping Stumpy, and then convicted for corruption under the ANC in a multiracial government, and she still stayed in parliament. That's how Julius Malema, a convicted felon, still sits in parliament and on the Judicial Service Commission and selects judges. The man is a convicted felon. He's not even supposed to be in government. And there was a really nice comment here for both of us from Reynold Steenkamp. He said, 2 of our best political analysts together. Well, thank you for the compliment. I'm sure that Byron appreciates it. I do.
Much appreciated. Much appreciated. Look, the reality is that the political position in South Africa feels very much like, if you listen to Ramaphosa talk, he talks about, praising of democracy and the popular vote and how it was also important. And then he'll go on the international stage and talk about the importance of following international laws and how the laws and the processes are so important, and the voting in the UN, and how these international bodies are so important that we should all just discuss stuff and all just get along. Meanwhile, back at home, he says you're getting NHR whether you want it or not. So your vote in South Africa means fuck all. You're getting it whether you want it or not, he says to you straight whilst looking you in the face. And we've seen this recently, even in a statement that came from the Civilian Secretariat in relation to firearms controls in South Africa, where Ian Cameron caught them on camera saying, actually, we need to pass this. We just need to pass it. Like, no one wants it, but we just need to pass it. That's not democratic. So coming back to the question asked, do your votes really count? Nah, I don't really think they do. But saying that, you may go, oh, South Africa is such a shit tip. Like, yeah, our votes don't even mean anything. Problem is, your votes don't mean anything in England either. England's had numerous examples where the population frequently tells the politicians they don't want mass migration. The politicians go, you don't know what's good for you, we're doing it anyway. Brexit. They had a whole campaign to leave the EU. Keir Starmer comes back and says, I'm pulling us back into the EU. But that's not what the public told you to do. The public told you to leave. He's like, yeah, the public don't really know what they want. I'm putting us back in. Like, your vote, regardless of what democracy you are in, isn't really a democracy now, is it? Because the politicians generally, they don't want you to tell them what to do. They want you to rubber stamp what they want you to do. Yep. So there's a fundamental difference. Democracy now isn't you tell me as your representative, this is what we want, and I'm going to do it as your elected individual. It's now me getting elected so that I can tell you what I want you to do, and then I want to use the democratic system for you to tell me that was a good decision. Rubber stamped.
Well, basically, the system is there to serve the elites. That's the purpose. And we see a lot of that in America, too. Look, I mean, in the UK, Keir Starmer and Labour weren't the people's choice, but Nigel Farage and Reform Party and the Tories split the vote. And if they'd all been voting for one party, say Reform Party, then there would be no Keir Starmer in government. The Tories certainly don't deserve to be in governance. They've proven that. They're almost as bad as Labour the past time they were in office. Really sad to see. But look, the Anglo-Celtic Caliphate is gone. It's interesting to see the king come over here and deign to tell us about democracy when they've abandoned the concept of the Magna Carta and civil liberties and arresting British citizens on the streets while allowing Muslims to pray on Church of England grounds.
Dude, a king lecturing on democracy.
I know. It's just that the irony is lost on him. It's completely lost on him. Well, and not to mention the fact that we sort of kicked his ass out of here 250 years ago. Apparently, he missed that part of the memo. It didn't quite reach him.
But how did he become king?
By birth.
Democratic vote by chance?
No, not even close. Yeah.
No, this is a do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying. These systems exist for the elites. In theory, we, the polity, form governments to represent our common needs like mutual defense, that sort of thing, and, dealing with transgression in society. But in reality, we've all been born into systems we've inherited, which have their flaws. Our system has its flaws. I mean, we got idiots like Ilhan Omar and Mitch McConnell in Congress. These people have no business serving anybody. The number of patriots actually serving the people is really small in our Congress. But, I mean, that's the reality. We've been born into a system, And, in our Declaration of Independence, it says from time to time it becomes necessary for the people to break away from the bands that bind them and form a new government. It's, maybe that's the case for some countries, but South Africa's got big choices here. Someone asked us what I think the turnout's going to be. Well, last time it was 31%. They claim it was 38%, but they're not including eligible voters. I include all eligible voters. If you're eligible to vote, you should be registered and voting, in my view. So it was 31% in the last municipal elections. We'd be lucky to see 38% this time, would be my guess.
Yeah, but that's also showing you that people have no interest in democracy anymore because they don't actually believe that their vote matters. And you see, to a large degree, it doesn't. And that's exactly why we are starting to have the very problem which we're discussing. They know that even if they get voted in to change certain things, they're not changing them. A good example is, okay, you've got a coalition with the DA, right? Okay, DA is part of the parties, but the DA is not the only one. The DA advocates for the end of BEE, right? Well, the DA is not the only one. So does the PA, so does the Freedom Front Plus, and so does the IFP. All four of those parties are in the GNU. They all want to see the end of the BEE system, right? What does the ANC say? Our policy is that you get in BEE whether you want to or not. So the people that voted for those four political parties are not important anymore. That's not a democratic system. That's not people telling you what their will is, because their will as a collective is not actually that different from the ANC's will as a collective, like in terms of numbers. And you're like, so why are you not listening to this? And the ANC has been very, very forthcoming. BE will, Ramaphosa himself has even said, BE will continue regardless. Now, you could say, well, democracy is holding people accountable. Well, let's be honest. There are so many examples. I could be here till tomorrow telling you about all the useless things his ANC ministers have been doing in government this time round whilst in a GNU that Ramaphosa has never held any of them accountable for. Just the other day, one of his ministers said, I will lie to Parliament in order to get my name cleared. I will lie to them and I will hide the truth from them. Ramaphosa was given the evidence of them saying this, and she was like, eh. So, what is democracy? Well, it's increasingly look like it's a lie, in which case, who wants to waste their time with a lie? So people are just opting out of the entire system because they don't see the system works. They don't see the system is a thing. It's well, to a degree it's not.
100%. Well, I don't know that we're at that stage now. It's maybe a question I'll save for the next time I speak to Victor Davis Hanson. Sorry, I was having a brain cramp there. It's something I want to pose to him. But in 1848, of course, Europe went through a revolution, the Spring of the Peoples. And that was all over Europe, the German Confederation, Denmark, Ireland, Poland. It was all over France. And people rose up in revolution. Didn't go down so well in the end for them, but it was definitely acting against the system that people wanted to overthrow. In fact, my last immigrant ancestor came over in 1848 as a consequence of that revolution from northern Germany and landed in Baltimore. But that was all of Europe. Pretty much, the main parts of Europe rose up against the existing orders of monarchy and empire. And you had, famous people like Metternich from the Austrian Empire, who was the foreign minister that was involved in trying to resolve that and put that down. But the Europeans were largely successful putting it down. But I think that we're probably not at that stage because people in too many places where they should be angry are just too comfortable. Their life is too comfortable. They go about their day-to-day grind. They do their thing. And they're not really suffering. In America, even poor don't suffer the way the poor suffer in Bangladesh or Pakistan or Gambia. So I think that we're not at that stage, but certainly all the factors that are there, the disenchantment with what's fake democracy, the disenchantment with the political systems there, I don't think we're headed towards an 1848 revolution, but certainly there's a lot of angry people around the world, Byron.
No, there are, but you can see that, like I say, even you might be tempted to listen to a podcast like this and you'd be like, oh, South Africa is a shithole. It must just be South Africa. Well, these problems are global. You're seeing them even in Germany. This one of the second largest political party in Germany is the AfD. Well, what does the establishment want to do? Well, they just ban AfD. And then if you criticize the people in power, what do? They make it illegal, so you can't criticize them. And then when you ask them why they're doing it, they say, well, we're protecting democracy. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you protecting democracy by putting it in a box, closing the box and sinking it to the bottom of the ocean and going, well, it's protected now because it's in a locked box at the bottom of the ocean? What we have now isn't actually democracy. It's some form of dictatorship. But don't worry, the democracy is safe because we housed it in a box and chained it up and put it in the bottom of the ocean. It's happening right across the Western world. Now, coming back to what you were saying around the revolutions in Europe, that's because there's a fundamental cultural difference, and that is, especially around that time period, there was the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment taught something fundamental, and that was that salvation could be achieved at the individual level. So the choices of the individual was very important. Okay, look, this is a long time ago, and so you have to take everything into account. The time period it was in. It was there during forms of Protestant reformations, with just out of the 100-Year War, with the split between Protestantism and Catholicism. There was this idea that the individual became sacrament. The individual itself was important. That's when you had the ideas of emancipation. It was all the same time period. Those ideas filtrated into people themselves. People had this idea of my life, my happiness. I want to have wealth. I want to do better. And the idea of the individual became more important, became more sacrament than that of the society. So it wasn't like, okay, well, we can all live in a shithole so long as the society progressed as a whole. You know, who cares if we denigrated some of your rights? It's all for the purposes of societal enrichment. Push that forward. Now, that's led to the conditions where people were more likely to hold their elected individuals to account. That's why democracy in that system worked, because you've got a collection of individuals who want to see their individual lives improved. And so when you get the voices of the individuals as a majority, then they tell a person what to do, as it's like the majority all want the same thing. You don't have this. I know I'm prattling on a little bit about this, but the point is you don't have that in Africa. You don't have those conditions. You don't have the same enlightenment. You don't have the same learning. You don't have the same expectations of the individual. In fact, you know, the Prince of the Paddies, Prince Adil, he once told me, you know, one of the reasons that communism does well in Africa isn't because communism is something that people like. It's because people want to be looked after by the tribe. And that sounds to them awfully a lot like communism. They don't actually want to be individuals. They want to be part of the collective. So I don't know if you would necessarily have this automatic like desire to reform the democratic system. If you ask Prince Adil and he told you what his view was, his view would be that the people in Africa, their natural instinct is actually to drift into a form of dictatorship and communism. It's not. What we currently have with a democracy in Africa actually goes against the grains of what the people who live in Africa want. That's at least his opinion.
No, that's 100% correct what he said, and spot on with you. And, you know, there's a veneer of democracy here. And even in places where we expect things are supposed to follow the rule of law, they don't. Perfect example is right here in these United States. I spent 36 and a half years in uniform defending the Constitution, which I keep right here on my desk. And the First Amendment of the Constitution clearly states that, very simple one, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Nothing to abridge freedom of speech. Yet during the COVID scam, we have evidence, compelling evidence, irrefutable evidence, that the National Institutes for Health, the Centers for Disease Control, Dr. Fauci, the White House communications team, the White House chief of staff colluded, cajoled, or coerced tech companies to silence my channel and thousands of other people who told the truth about this, oftentimes simply reporting the data the government reported. When they changed the data or lied about it later on, suddenly we were in breach of codes and standards and community policies on these platforms. These people have never been charged with a crime. You know, Trump is obsessed with going after people that offended him, and I have no problem with that. But I want people who offended the very Constitution, the basic law of this land, the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. These people have paid no consequence for suppressing freedom of speech, something I nearly gave my life for to protect, and they just piss all over it. It shows you that all this concept of democracy and governance is really just a veneer for the elites. That's how I see it.
It's also important to understand this isn't the first time in history democracy has been tried. I mean, democracy was invented by the Greeks. The Greeks tried it, it failed. The Romans tried it, it failed. Like democracy's been tried many times before, and what we're in danger of getting to is a situation where it's like the old communist line, right? Real communism hasn't really been tried, or we've tried this time, and we'll do it differently, and we'll do it better. And there is almost a degree of like, what was the Greeks' argument as to why democracy failed? Well, because democracy would eventually revolt or morph into a form of majoritarianism, and majoritarianism would eventually form into populism. In other words, I just tell you what you want to hear rather than what the reality of the situation is. Now, in all of those instances, they lead to a failure of society. And the result is that the society always becomes more autocratic as a result. And personally, I think we're living through one of those eras. I think we are actually at the pinnacle now where many democracies, if you look at the global satisfaction on democracies, are failing. And some of the countries that are starting to do better, or at least have a more satisfaction rate, actually have, as much as I hate to say it, monarchs. You know, the UAE, single party state, monarch, actually does all right. You know, is it the perfect place? No, but Dubai is a very favorable place for many individuals to want to go set up businesses and live in. So this is the situation that we're now finding ourselves in. Even G's China is doing, in some instances, far better than some European countries with full democracy. So you can see the leaning globally on democracy isn't looking good.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Hang on a second. I just got to deal with something in the chat because my moderators are sleeping here. So just got to take. Where's it at? There we go. Get rid of that. Yeah. Yeah. Listen. It's. Make sure I don't put the wrong button here. I don't want to. I don't want to punish somebody. It wasn't that egregious, but no. That's why the thing has always appealed to me about our system, which is far from perfect, is at least it has some intentional guardrails put in place by arguably one of the greatest collections of brilliant minds gathered in one place at one time when this country was founded. They put guardrails. That's why we have the Electoral College, because they recognize that democracy really is simply the tyranny of the majority. 51 decides what 49 must suffer. And so they realized that, and that's why they put in place the Electoral College. And the reason for that, for the audience, not for Byron, I'm sure Byron understands this, but for the audience, there were 13 colonies, became 13 states. Only 4 of them were large and heavily populated: New York, Massachusetts, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. And those 4 colonies or states had the overwhelming majority of the population and the GDP and the money and the resources. If you create a system in which, by simple majority, they would rule the country and they would decide what happened for everybody else. And the founders said, that's not fair. That's not reasonable. Plus, the other 9 states would never have joined. We never would have had a United States. They're like, well, screw it, unless there had been a war to conquer them. They'd been like, I don't want to be part of this. My voice is not there. That's why initially under our system, you didn't vote for senators. They were selected by state legislatures up until the 20th century. Additionally, the Electoral College was based on equal representation. Every state was just as valuable as the other state. The Senate's the senior body of the legislature, which has the major checks on the executive branch and the judicial branch. And they have 2 senators, regardless of whether you have 580,000 people like Wyoming or 53 million people like California. So that was why our system, it's not perfect, but at least has guardrails. But those guardrails have kind of fallen by the wayside. I think they've gotten rusty. We need to get out and get some new galvanized steel out there to replace them, because we've got some problems here in America. But anyway, that's kind of a little bit about that. Byron, I don't know, we probably should wrap up here soon. You've got some stuff to do, unless you want to go a little bit longer. But I think maybe we haven't done this in a while, so I don't think we want to overstay our welcome with the audience. But any final thoughts? Do you want to share anything? I think people have enjoyed our conversation today. It's been missed.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think regardless of where you are globally at the moment, we are living through some very difficult times. We really are living through some very difficult times, and the democratic process at the moment is not looking good. What can you say? If you haven't already, do subscribe to my WhatsApp channel, please. I mean, obviously it's just join and you can see the news, but you can see what's going on in the UK. It's not great. Now, I pick on the UK because obviously I'm also from that territory and I have a good understanding as to what's going on in the UK. But I also pick on that territory because the UK remains the number one destination for South Africans wishing to immigrate out of South Africa. Number two is obviously Australia, number three being New Zealand, number four being Canada. So, and it's amazing, it's always the same four countries, but all four countries are currently going through massive turmoil. And they're not positive. And part of it is because one of the things South Africans as a whole don't generally tend to notice is that they're not the only ones that these countries are looking to import into their nations. There are other countries. In fact, South Africans account for a very small number of global immigration, a very small number. The actual immigration in much larger numbers is coming from other countries, and that's basically who you're joining. At least in South Africa, it's still relatively constrained for now. But the reality is we are living in very, very, very strange times. Very strange times.
Well, indeed, I agree with 100% of that, Byron. It is definitely strange times, and that's great to have this conversation with you again. A lot of nice comments coming in from the audience saying they appreciate our conversation. It's been a while. Byron's been busy. I've been busy. He's got his businesses. Plus, he picked up the Morning Shot full-time gig, not a full-time job, but took over total responsibility for it when Roman went to work for South Africa's white Minister of Agriculture. You might remember him, John Steenhuisen. He's just put out something today about foot and mouth, but I couldn't see if Byron was smiling when I called him the white Minister of Agriculture, but he is smiling. Anyway,
is the GNU's token waka?
That's right. There you go. Anyway, so, all right. With that, folks, let's wrap it up here for this version of the Braai Brus. Thanks for joining us today. Be sure to leave a comment behind. I'll put a link into Byron's The Morning Shot WhatsApp group because I'm in that. I'll do that. We hadn't talked about that before since he mentioned someone asked for it. I'll put it below the video. Also put a link to Morning Shot, although I think everybody knows what Morning Shot is, but I'll put one there as well. And Byron, thanks. I think it was overdue that we had a conversation. I really enjoyed it, and thank you. By the way, I'm a little envious. Was that coffee maker always in your office? I don't recall if it was there last time I was there. It's a beautiful looking coffee maker in the corner. Yeah. Has it always been there?
Yeah. No, I got it, a few months ago.
Okay.
I actually had it at the house, but in the house I've got like 4 different coffee machines. What some people may say I have a coffee problem, but hence why even my brand is like a coffee cup. So, what can I say? But yeah, I had too many coffee machines at the office, and I thought to myself, I come to work, and then I think to myself, I really should have more coffee, and then I don't have it. So I was like, just bring one of the 50 million from home. So thanks for noticing it. It does actually get used a lot. In fact, I nearly made one before this live stream, but I will make one after it.
Right now. No, it definitely gets people's attention. And I don't recall it sitting there last time I was in your office. That's why it caught my attention. I assume it makes cappuccinos?
It does, actually. It makes cappuccinos, lattes, and normal coffees. No decaf allowed. So, yeah, it's all good.
All right. Well, I'll keep that in mind for my next visit. Cappuccino.
No worries.
All right. So, Byron Shepherd, folks. Byron, I'll let you drop off, and I'll wrap it up here. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
No worries. Take it easy. Bye.
All right, folks. Byron Shepherd from Morning Shot down there on in the Eastern Cape. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. It's great to do this again with Byron. It's been a while, so I hope you enjoyed it. Just kind of a laid-back conversation, talk about politics and about political science in general. It's nice to see. So thank you very much. Have a good one. You'll be redirected to the news, which starts at the top of the next hour. It's an abbreviated news segment for just 1 hour because we go directly into the first collaboration between Professor G and myself. It's the Colonel and Professor G's Refugee Forum coming up at 1 Eastern Standard Time, 1300. That would be 7 p.m. in South Africa. So you're welcome to tune in for that if you want to join us. Thank you all for being here. And thanks for, feel free to leave a comment behind. And if you don't mind, a like would be appreciated. And I'll put those links in so you guys can find what you're looking for over on Morning Shot. All right, that's going to do it. Take care, folks. Thanks for being a good audience. Cheers.